We're live, but yes, you can ask this question. Maybe this be part of the video. What you got? Check. Yeah, yeah. We'll look at that after the video. Yeah, let's look at that after. Yeah, John. Okay. All right. So as you can see out there in YouTube land, I'm not just talking to you. I got my coders here with me, and we're working through this stuff together. Um. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to see how we can update the data that is uh in our database. Okay, so the way we'll start this off is I have my Postman up. So I have my Postman up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an artist. I'm going to post an artist in here, and I'm going to misspell that artist's name. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do here. So our here I am in Postman. I already have my URL. Everything is together. Make sure that your server is running. Okay, so your server needs to be running for this. Have Postman up. I already have my post artist that we did uh, in the previous lesson, and so I'm going to add an artist in here. I'll just do Janis Joplin. Okay, and I'm purposefully misspelling or purposely, not purposefully, purposely misspelling Janis Joplin's name here. Okay. So got all that together. Um, I'm going to hit send. And see, that's the cool thing about Postman is I once I create my collection and everything, and I have my endpoints and stuff. This is stored is together. I don't have to go and do anything extra. All I got to do is make sure that my server is running. I have all the templates and everything here. Um, so that's why we save these requests. So I'm going to hit send, and when I do, I get last ID 11. Okay, so that should have posted to the database. Let's check and see just to verify. So you can see here, I've sent Janis Joplin, name misspelled. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is come over here into my database and okay, cool. So we want to be able to, sometimes you want to update data. Let's say you want to update the last name of an account of a user. We're going to do the backend for this and write the method out that will allow us to do this. Okay, so this is going to go inside of Dow Common. I'm going to put this below my create method, and I'm going to sorry about that. I'm going to name this update, and this update method is going to again take a request, take a response, and I want to and the table. That's it. So we'll take the in the table. All right. And so in this method, what we're going to do, we're going to say, hey, update this particular information. All right. So the first thing we want to do is we want to ask ourselves, because we were getting the request and we're going to need the ID from the request. Okay. So I want to say first, let's check if ID is equal to a number, because if we know if the ID is not a number, then this is not going to work, because this is only updating information that is already inside of the database. Okay, so it's not going to update anything that doesn't exist, and everything that's in the database has been assigned an ID as its primary key, and that's what we're basing on. So I'm going to say if, and I'll say is nan or is not a number, and inside there passing request.params.id. So if it's true that request.params.id is not a number, meaning it's a string or something else, then what we're going to do, we're going to response.json, and we'll, message. We'll set the error to be true, and the message, I'm going to say ID must be a number. Okay, that's it. So this is if the ID is not a number, we're going to send a message that says, hey, the ID needs to be a number. Let me move that down. So if it is a number, the next thing I want to do is I want to check to see if there is actually information to post. Like, in other words, we'll look at the request.body and say, hey, if the request, is there something in the request.body? Okay, I'm going to say else if, open parentheses, object.keys request.body.length. Oh, let me go outside of there, outside that first parentheses, dot length is equal to 0. Or in other words, if request.body, well, if object.keys request.body's length is equal to 0. Again, object.keys is a method on the object that will return an array of the properties. So it's going to take request.body and it's going to look at the keys or the properties of them and store them in it, and it will return an array. And if the length of the array is 0, meaning that there's no properties, no keys, then what are we going to do? We're going to response.json, say error, set that to be true, and the message will be no fields to update. So first we're checking if the ID is a number. Excuse me. And then we check to see if the request.body object has properties and values for us to use. And if both of these statements are false, then what we're saying is, okay, request.params does have an ID and request.body does have properties and values for us to use. So here I'll say else. And now it's going to sort of look like our create method. So in other words, we need the fields. So I'm going to say const fields is going to get object.keys request.body. And then we need the values. Const values is going to get object.values request.body. So we take that request.body object and we break it apart. We're going to break it apart into two different pieces, the keys and then the values. And then after that, once we take it apart, we're going to take those pieces and fit it into our SQL query. And that we can do that right here. We'll say connect.execute. connect.execute, and we're going to say update whatever the table is. We're writing SQL here, and we're going to set. Oh, I'm sorry. Fields.join. Again, this looks a little bit like what we've seen before. So fields.join, open parentheses, and inside the parentheses, single quote, space, equal sign, space, question mark, comma, space, single quote, and then close the parentheses. And make sure that all of that is inside of the $ curly brace. Okay. And then add an equal sign question mark. And I can say where table underscore ID is equal to question mark. Let me move this query. Let me set that like so, and maybe this would be a little more readable for up. Need that $. So here's my SQL query. And if I make this a little smaller, you can see this is what it looks like all in one line. Update table, set fields.join, that stuff equal to question mark, where table ID is equal to question mark. Put your semicolon, and then after the backtick, we need our comma. And then the second argument for our execute method, in some cases, it could be your callback function. But what we need some information to represent these question marks here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send an array. What we'll do is we'll spread out values, and then also pass in request.params.id. So what will happen is, again, we took apart the request.body object, and we stored the properties into an array called fields, and we stored the values into an array called values. In that array called values, we're going to spread it out inside of this array that we're passing into our con.execute method. And the last item in that array is going to be request.params.id. So what will happen is it'll pair the keys or the fields back up with the values here inside of this fields.join and this final question mark. And so what connect.execute does is going to go through this array, and starting with the first item to the last is going to place them in wherever it sees a question mark. And so once that is done, once we've matched up the fields with the values back inside our query, this final question mark params.id. So I guess in theory, the length of this array should be the length of fields plus 1. So that way everything in fields gets matched up with its corresponding value, and then request.params.id, that'll be the last item in the array, and that will be represented by this question mark here. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. All right, so there's our SQL query, there's our array, and now the last thing we need to do is write our callback function. We're going to take the error in DB response, And what are we going to do? We're going to say, hey, if there's no error, then we're going to response.send, and I'll just say, I backtick. I'm going to say changed, and then this will be DB response dot changed rows, and I'll say row or rows. So if it's success, we can response.send change rows, DB response.change rows, or we can do this. We can say instead, we can say response.json. I think I'll do this. I'm just trying something a little different. I just want to appear differently. I'll say status is my property, and updated is going to be my value, and then I have changed rows, and it will be well, let me make it I don't have to do this, but I'm doing it. Changed rows will be DB response.changed rows. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this response.send. I'm just going to comment that out. I would like for it to be formatted as an object right here. Okay. And so now that's what to do if there is no error. But if there is an error, so right here I'm going to say else. Inside, here's my chain. See that curly brace pairs with this one here. You see that. So else, what are we going to do? I'm going to response dot send. I'll say error creating record. Or maybe again, what I'll do is our response.json, and I'll say status error, and then I put error, and then pass in the error, whatever it is. Okay, and this should do it right here. So with the update, again, first thing we got to do is we got to check and make sure, hey, the ID is a number or not. And if it's not a number, we'll send the error saying, hey, we're setting the error to true, saying, hey, ID has to be a number. And then we check to see, okay, if request.params.id is in fact a number, we check and see if the request.body object has length, if there's properties and values in there. And if it doesn't, then we send another error message saying, hey, no fields to update. And then in which case, if request.params.id is a number and there are keys and values inside the request.body object, well, then we run our code here where we split up the request.body into two separate arrays. We run our SQL query, and let's format this here. Let's say error, set this to be true. And then I'll change that to message, and then whatever the error is. Okay. So this should work. So now what we need to do, now that we've written up our method, our update method, the next thing we need to do is we need to add this to our routes. So let's go to our artist routes. Okay. And here in our artist routes, where we are patch method now. And again, when you're doing your requests or your routes in your individual routes, always start off with your get methods, put that at the top. The last get method should be your single artist or a single entity by ID. And then after your get requests or your get routes, you set up your post routes. And then underneath your post routes, the router.patch update. Okay. And then we'll pass in the ID like so. Takes a request and response. And what are we going to do? We're going to DAO.update. Where are you? Oh, there it is. I passed it. DAO.update. We take the request, the response, and DAO.table. All right. And so now that we got that, now we can test this out to see if it works. Okay, so I still have my server running, I believe. Yes, it looks like it's running okay. Cool. So I'm going to come over here to Postman now. And inside of Postman, you see I have album, artist, band, label folders. This is going to go in the artist folder. And inside my artist folder, you see I have get and post folders. I'm going to create a new folder. So add folder, this folder, I'm going to name this one patch. I'm going to add a request for patch. And there I find the request. So I click here, the request again. It's going to be patch. I'm going to name this, I'm going to name it update artist. Okay. And now I need the URL. So I'm going to pass in URL right there. /artist/ we named it update. And I need the ID. And the ID for this particular artist is 11 because that's the one I want to update. Again, that's Janis Joplin, who has so that's what's going here. So now I need to set up my request. So I go to headers. Again, I'm down here, the key, the content type be application/JSON, just like what we had for our posting. My body, I'm going to set my body to raw. And then I pass the information from my body. So the first name, is it first name? Oh, F name. So F name, now I enter the information incorrectly. Janis, and then L name. PLIN. There we go. And so now I enter the information in correctly. Okay. And once I have all that, make sure again that you have all your headers correct, particularly the content type application/JSON. The rest of them you should be able to leave as they are. The body, make sure that it's raw JSON. Make sure that your method is a patch method. Then I hit send. and it was successful. I had status updated, change rows 1. Cool. Let's check in the database. ICE job land. I'm going to select all from artists, and there I see that the entry has been updated. So that is successful. Cool. Whew. It worked on the first try. That I think you all know. So this is how we update. Now that I know that this works, I can apply this to my other so in other words, come over here to band routes. I'm going to say router.post because it's in the DAO comment accessible to the other DAOs. So just all I need to do is just add the route to each one. DAO.update, paste request, response, and DAO.table. And this, I'm sorry, this should be patch. So router.patch. And I'm going to just copy this because it's going to look exactly the same with the, and I think I can go ahead and add it over here to the albums, even though we haven't touched the posting for an album, which you may have to do a little something different there. I'm trying to work on that. So now all of the patches were the other 3 endpoints. So for artist, band, and label, we have a patch method for each one of those. So real quick to wrap this up, one thing that you will come across is what is the difference between put and patch? So we have a put method and we have a patch method. Okay. And so what is the difference between the two of them? The put method, they both update the tables. Okay. So let me say that both put and patch updates the table. Okay. What the put method does is it replaces the entire entity. Okay. Whereas the patch will partially update it. So say for example, you have a record in your database that you want to completely replace all the entries in there and fill it in with something else. There you would use a put method to do that. If you, however, just want to replace just certain pieces of it, just make updates to it, you would use patch. Now for the challenge that we had, we could have used a put method and it would have worked just as fine because I did replace or updated both the first and the last name of the artist. However, I know that may not always be the case. Maybe I misspell the first name and not the last name, in which case I would only want to update the first name. And so I went with patch instead of put. But if there is a case for your table or your records that you will want to update the entire thing every single time, well, then instead of using router dot, you could use router dot put, and that will update the entire thing. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope that you got something out of it, and if it worked, great. The last thing I want to try, well, maybe not be the last thing, but what I would like to do next is see if we can figure out how we can add an album into our database, because with the album, we're not only having to, we will need to get information from the other tables, i.e., the artist ID, band ID, and label ID. We would need that information to be able to make an update on the table. Okay, so that's what I would like to do next, if we can get there. So, yes, again, as always, if you enjoy these lessons, please subscribe to my channel, like and share, get these views up, watch it over, just let it run over and over and over again, so I can get like, a cool 15 billion views for this. And with that, I will see you on the other side of this video.